Good morning and welcome to the latest webinar from Farm Equipment Magazine. I'm Dave Kanicki, Executive Editor of Farm Equipment, and today's event is being brought to you free, courtesy of PFW. Today's presenters are Ted Stair, Solution Consultant for PFW, and Matt McConnell, Director of Service Operations for Koenig Equipment. Koenig Equipment is an 11-store farm equipment dealership group with locations in Ohio and Indiana. The subject of today's webinar is Better Communication, Greater Profits in the Service Department. Ted will share an easy-to-implement communication process for your service department that can help increase profitability. He'll also share some real-time electronic communications and tracking tools to help improve the accuracy and increase billable hours in your service department. Matt will join the conversation to offer a dealer's perspective on the successful implementation of some of these strategies from his experience. Okay, we're ready to roll. Thanks again for joining us. We will now turn over the controls to Ted Stair to begin his webinar presentation. It's all yours, Ted.
When Boeing began to design and build the 787 Dreamliner, it was a bet the farm proposition. It will be lighter, stronger, with a composite body and more fuel-efficient engines. In fact, 20% more fuel-efficient. It would be able to connect any two cities in the world. Greater cabin pressure, larger windows, and more natural lighting would lead to a better passenger experience. In fact, it would transform passenger expectations of flying. But Boeing didn't want to just dominate commercial aviation with this new aircraft. They wanted to change the way jetliners were built, conception to completion. Their new business model was expected to cut costs and decrease development time. Now, they were using software that would manage the project and allow international vendors to communicate via the web instead of face-to-face. Now, how did such a promise turn into such a litany of problems, cost overruns, and delayed deployment? I mean, we've all heard about these recent equipment failures, the lithium battery fires that grounded the entire fleet. Well, of course, it's been analyzed to death by experts, what went wrong, and it's been tracked down to a number of key issues, but one of the most important was lack of face-to-face communication. Management by walking around was a theory pioneered by Hewlett-Packard in the 1970s. It encourages managers to set aside time to walk around through departments. Recognized by Edward Deming, if you wait for people to come to you, you'll only get small problems. You must go and find them. The big problems are where people don't realize they have one in the first place. Well, repairing agricultural and construction equipment is not as complex as building a jet aircraft. However, we all know with precision farming and with stakeless construction, it's not simple either. In fact, as a technician myself, I remember how often I thought how often a problem that I thought was pretty simple turned into something different, or how a broken bolt could transform a simple job into an all-day affair. Staying on top of all these changes and staying in touch with other departments, and of course the customer, can be daunting, and as we know, a full-time job. And of course, lots can be lost in communication. How many of you ever heard from a technician, oh yeah, it just needs a little bit of work, or oh yeah, just a couple hours, I'll have that done. So today we're going to talk about a walk-around process. It really examines the plan that a dealership has for every machine and where they are on those plans. It looks at what's preventing the plan from being executed and what you need to get the plan back on track. It's a snapshot based on a dealership management system that captures open work orders and electronic timestamps on every segment. It's a foundation for the process and the conversation with the technicians. And we'll talk to Matt a little bit later, and we'll have him explain his success that he's had implementing his workaround process. So really what we want our workaround sheet to do is to review key pieces of information sorted in priority sequence. So of course we probably want a work order number, the model number, the customer name, the priority, and a downtime delay code. So a downtime delay code really is just a way of summarizing what that machine is waiting for. Is it waiting for parts? Is it waiting for authorization? The start date, so we know how many days we're into it. An estimated completion date, the hours worked so far, the hours charged, and a brief description of the job. And then whether we're doing it electronically, whether we're doing it on a printed sheet, we probably want some space to allow the supervisor or the service manager to make any handwritten notes and adjustments. Service managers can meet with technicians twice daily to discuss delays, completion commitment, any complication, talk about the budgeted hours, any new jobs to be assigned. For example, extending the estimated completion date, notifying the customers accordingly, or adjusting the number of technicians can ensure that the date is completed, or the job is completed at least by the date promised or the new date promised to the customer. Now, once a service manager is finished discussing and taking notes on the individual jobs, they can enter any work order adjustments or updates into their system for the next time. At this point, decisions can be made in regard to contacting the customer and or assigning additional technicians as necessary. Well, let's start talking specifics. Caning Equipment is a process-driven organization. They identify, analyze, and improve everything they do. Based on this foundation, they have realized tremendous growth and success, growing their business to 11 branches in Indiana and Ohio. Today, Matt McConnell from Caning Equipment will share his success story of using a structured walk-around process in his service departments. Matt's the Director of Service Operations and has responsibility for 90 techs, and that's 90. Matt has kindly volunteered to share his process with us. Now, in his responsibility for the service operations, Matt is focused on reducing waste. And in Matt's world, waste is unbilled hours. Matt, what challenges drove you to create a walk-around process?
Well, good morning, everyone. The main challenge was we have to account for over 200,000 of tech hours in the course of a year. Going back 2 or 3 years, our write-offs were pretty high, and many times we wrote off time after the work order was closed, and we found that we were really negotiating with customers after the work was already done. So one of the things that we did was really committing to quoting every possible job and establishing expectations both on the customer side and on our side, and then sharing that information with the tech. Once we started to do that, we were really able to start measuring wasted inventory or lost time. What we discovered was that in many cases, the stuff that we wrote off was actually when we did more than what we originally said we were going to do. For example, we would quote replacing a sprocket, and then while we were in there, you know what, the bearing doesn't look that good, the chain doesn't look that good, I'm going to go ahead and replace it. Well, obviously that's going to take longer. You're going to add parts to the job, and if we hadn't got approval up front to do that, now we're negotiating at the end. So what it really came down to was, as a service manager, do you want to find out that a 40-hour job is going to go over when you're at 40 and it's not done, or do you want to find out sooner in the process, like at 10 hours? Our techs were not consistently communicating additional work to the service manager. We weren't always getting approval. And obviously there were other times where the job just took longer. It was misdiagnosed at the beginning. Lots of different things that go wrong during a service repair. Our service managers really felt like they knew what was going on. And in fact, most of them didn't really see the need for this additional step. But as we went, they discovered that a lot of things do slip through the cracks. And without a consistent process, there was no way for us to catch that. So that was really what drove us to this.
How's that process changed since you first adopted that workaround process, Matt?
Well, the walkaround sheet is simply a reflection of open work orders, and it's displayed by technician assignment. So one of the first things we had to do was make sure that every work order that we have a request for is actually entered into the system. If it's not entered into the system, you can't see it on the walkaround sheet. We then shifted from work order management into segment management. And in other words, on a large combine job, you might have an engine repair, you might have a feeder house repair, there might be something with the unloading auger. Those are all separate jobs. So by breaking those out, we can make those into smaller segments that are a lot easier to manage. Over the course of doing this, we've also been able to add parts guys to the process. They actually participate in the walk around with our service managers, and that's really given us a lot of extra focus on the parts. A lot of times that's the delay. So if the parts department knows how important things are, it gets them involved into the service objectives. They understand the critical timing issues. Maybe they can pull something out of the stock order box a little sooner in the day, and they can really help reduce the wait time. We've also been able to assign one tech to handle walk-ins. So in other words, he's not assigned for the day. He'll work on stuff that maybe isn't scheduled till next week if there isn't anything to do, but we can be a lot more responsive. And in some cases, our service managers have actually shifted to tablets with real-time walk-around data on their screen instead of the printed off copy.
So you got that buy-in from parts. What about other departments? Has it affected other departments other than parts and service?
Yeah, and quite frankly, that wasn't something that was part of our original mission, but it has been a big benefit to us. We actually post these sheets on a board in the service department so parts and sales can see what's going on. We talked a little bit about how the parts guys have been engaged in helping us reduce delays, but also now the sales guys can see which one of their customers has machines in the shop, how big the repair is. Sometimes that can turn into a sales lead for, instead of spending all that money on fixing it, maybe we could talk to them about trading it. The sales guys can also see the impact of bringing in that rush job, and anybody that manages service departments that have salesmen at the same store, hey, can you get this one in here real quick? Well, now they can see that it's one of their customers that's going to get pushed back. So it just has let our whole branch teams get engaged in what's going on in service.
So how would you sum up the benefits you experienced from establishing a walk-around process?
Well, I guess number one would be we have happier customers. We do survey our customers, and one of the things that we ask them after a work order is, were they satisfied with their total service experience? And before we started this process, we were averaging 83% saying yes, and now we're averaging over 94%. So that's number one. After we got through the
results, Matt.
I'm sorry?
Those are excellent results, Matt.
Yeah, it has really been a plus for us and obviously for the customers. Our service managers are happier too. After they got past the initial pain of actually having to change how they do things during the day, they're in the loop, they're in control. When their customers are happier, they're happier, and they're not negotiating bills. Our techs are happier. They actually know what their direction is for the day. They know their priorities. The way that we've set it up is you work on your first priority until you get a delay, and then you go to number 2 and then number 3. So if the service manager's on the phone for half an hour with a customer, they don't have to go ask him what to do next. So they know what their day looks like. They know their priorities. I'm a lot happier because I'm not getting calls from customers about their bill. And my CEO is a lot happier because we've been able to write off about 50% less than we did a couple years ago.
Wow.
Our labor performance, which is another term for revenue recovery, has gone from 75% to 84% in a couple years. So we're selling a lot more of our inventory of hours. And with 90 techs, 185,000 hours on work orders, improving that by 9% is about 17,000 hours. At an average of almost $80 an hour, you can do the math. It makes a big difference on profitability.
Yeah, that is incredible. Hey, did you find any unexpected benefits? Anything you didn't realize or didn't foresee?
Well, the main thing is it keeps us focused on the tasks at hand, and it has, I guess just because we have to be disciplined to put all those work orders in, things aren't being missed. As far as measurables go, We have much shorter completion times, and we have ag shops and lawn and garden shops. We've actually cut our completion times about in half, from an average of about 6.8 days to about 3.7 days. So that's number one. Our work in process was running anywhere close to $1 million any given day, down to about 450, and that's because we can close segments and close work orders much faster by looking at them every day, passing those on to the service writer, and everything's just getting processed much quicker. So that doesn't hurt the bank account either. By knowing what's coming in and plugging everything into the schedule, we've actually been able to move techs around from one shop to the next. If one shop maybe is a little bit slow and another one's busy, we can see that coming about a week in advance, and we can actually move an unused tech into a shop where we need some help for a few days, and then send him back to his original assignment. And I guess lastly, because we've been able to look at what's coming at us and manage our waste, we've been able to add a second ag shop shift to one of our stores. This process allows you to see where your wasted time is and then find out what the root cause is. In the case of that shop, the root cause of a lot of our inability to grow was not having enough space. And unless we wanted to build another $2 million shop, then you have to use the time that you have during the day a lot more efficiently. And one of the ways we were able to do that was add a second shift. And I don't think we would have been able to see what was causing our waste without this process.
So it was feedback for you too. Clearly, it sounds like any equipment dealer could benefit from a defined walkaround process. Have you got any advice or suggestions for other folks on the call on how they could implement their own process?
Well, I guess my first one would be start small. We have 16 service departments at 11 stores, and we did not roll this out over the whole dealership all at the same time. We picked a couple of shops, and we worked out the processes and all the bugs on a small scale. We had a little bit of chaos in those shops while we were doing this. You certainly want to control that and not cause chaos throughout the whole organization. So that's number one, start small. Number two, I'd say clearly define the process and try to keep it as simple as you can. There's a lot of things you can do with this, but start small and keep it simple. What are we trying to accomplish today? And really it's just having a conversation about where we are. Are we on pace and are we on schedule? By on pace, I mean, are we going to complete this in the allotted hours? On schedule is, are we going to complete it by the promised date, that we told the customer? If you can focus on those two things to start with, everything else will kind of roll itself up almost naturally. You need to plan for some resistance. Service technicians and service managers can be a bit of a stubborn bunch, and at least initially they probably won't see the need for adding this because they feel like they talk all the time and really know what's going on. And I think what they'll find out if you give it a chance and stick with it is they'll actually discover that there's a lot of stuff that they don't know. Just like the quote that you put up on the screen a little bit earlier, people only come to you with the really big problems. The small ones is where you can avoid delays later. Monitor it daily. As a supervisor, you got to monitor your service managers and techs and make sure that they're following this process long enough for it to become a habit. Running it for 2 days and then walking away and hoping it continues is not going to work. I think someone once said it takes 21 days to start a habit, and I'd say at least that long in the service department. The other thing I would suggest is clearly define the metrics that are affected and report those results as often as you can. People want to see that what they're doing is having an impact. Celebrate the wins, maybe even go overboard, and then coach the losses. If there's something that isn't going right, let's talk it out. Engage the team early would be another thing. You're going to have to let them understand what we're trying to do, and then explain what's happening to the parts and the sales department too. They can be a source of distraction, and you want to make sure you get them on board. That they really don't have to do anything, but they need to understand what's happening. And then I guess lastly, you need to realize that some service managers are not managers, and this process will show you if they lack discipline and the ability to follow a plan. And you may need to coach them up on how to do that, or maybe even make some changes.
Matt, I just wanted to pick up on that point. You said keep it simple at first. Would you say that was a big part of the success of getting people to adopt it, was that it was simple and not a whole bunch of different steps around at once?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean, it really is as simple as printing off the work order assignments that you have for the day, going out and talking to the technicians about where are we on this job. That's really all you have to do. All the other things and all the benefits that we saw, came a little bit further down the road. But it's much easier to implement this on a large scale when you've had small scale success, and you can point to that department over there and say, look, they've gotten from 75% to 85% revenue recovery, and this is the only thing that they've changed. Not the whole group doesn't need to see all the painful tweaks and all the little implementation problems that you have. Work that out on a small scale and then expand it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Matt, thank you so much for sharing your walk-around process with us.
Sure.
I hope everyone on the call today can listen to what Matt says and think about how they manage their work orders, open work orders, and how they can create their own walk-around process. So as a courtesy to everyone on the call, we'll send out a white paper authored by Ross Atkinson, Director of Development at PFW, that again talks about this process. So thank you again, Matt, and let's open up the floor to Q&A for Matt and myself.
Okay, we've got several questions, and most of them are aimed at Matt, so let's get started. Some of them are fairly basic. For example, one asked, for tech wages, are you charging a flat rate or hourly?
We charge our customers flat rate, and we pay our technicians hourly. Now, we do have some incentive programs that are built in the process that are largely based on their ability to hit completion times and also on rework. So the techs are engaged in hitting the times and the completion dates that we started up front, but we are not paying our techs flat rate today.
Okay. Another one mentions another system. I won't mention it, but I will give you the question. He said, one of our greatest weaknesses is service scheduling. I've been looking at a different system, but I would prefer PFW. Can you give us some idea what led you to work with PFW, Matt?
Well, we've been using PFW since, I don't know, the early 80s, a long time. So our business has kind of grown around this software. But there's a lot of segments in IntelliDealer, which is that's PFW's product, that you can use or not use. The Walkaround Sheet has been out there for a long time, and once we found it, with the challenges that I mentioned at the beginning, it was just a very simple fix. Everything's already in the system. It's not, you don't have to run a report. You just go to your service management screen, and it's one of the options. You just pull it up and print it. You're not spending a lot of time creating reports. As far as the scheduling goes, as I said earlier, the Walkaround Sheet is just a reflection of work that is in the computer and already scheduled. When you open up the work order, you're putting in your start date, your completion date, and how long does it take. So it's really automatic. There's a separate function within IntelliDealer that shows you how much time you have scheduled per tech per day, and that's another thing that we use to predict how busy we're going to be in the next 30 to 90 days. So really this ties directly into scheduling.
Okay, the next question. How do you keep up with billing with a service department with, in this case, he says 6 service techs, and some of these guys being road guys?
Well, again, if you're using the Walkaround Sheet process, which In our case, we do this twice a day, once in the morning and once right after lunch. And a lot of times a tech will finish a job and move on to the next one and not tell anyone. So if you're not in the loop on what's going on, you're never going to be able to get it billed. This process enables you to know at least twice a day, even if the techs never come to tell you anything, you're going out and asking them. I'm guessing the road techs, at least in our case, they have cell phones, so our road techs aren't actually in the shop for this. It happens on the phone. So, that right there, by going to them and asking what's going on, you can bill. Now, in our case, we've broken up large work orders into segments, and you can actually close a segment without billing the work order. In the case of a 40 to 80 hour combine work order, that may be 15 to 20 segments. Well, do you want to overload your service writer with closing and billing all 20 segments when it's done, or give her little bits at a time so when the job's done it doesn't take very long?
Okay.
That's, I guess that would be my advice is, you're going to be talking to these guys on a lot more frequent and consistent basis with a very specific mission for your call, and that's going to let you get ahead of the curve.
Okay, the next question, how do you communicate repair unit priority / urgency so all team members are on the same page?
Well, the Walkaround Sheet is designed with priority as one of the sort fields. In our case, that's how we communicate that to the technicians. They're going to work on priority number 1 first, priority number 2 second, third, and so forth. If you look at the screen, you'll see that we have one at the top that's a 00. That means this was an unexpected repair that we deem an emergency. You have to drop what you're doing and go fix it. But once that's done, you go right back to number 1. So this process all by itself has priority just as part of the process.
Okay, here's a direct question. Are dealers charging the customer for technician breaks?
Yes, we are.
All right. Another one is a little off the subject, but it looks like he's looking for some direction. How do you promote remanufactured parts to assist with your service efficiencies at Koenig?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. By being able to, let me back up. We don't really talk about our labor rates. We talk about repair costs. So if you look at the screen, Norma Tracy, we're replacing a throttle knob. Here's how much replacing that knob costs. That's going to be parts and labor. The next one down, we're going to quote that job. Obviously, we've got to get approval on the front end before we start that job. So using reman parts, usually, obviously it really depends on the situation, but usually it's going to be a lot less labor to do that. Our service managers want to sell as many segments as they can. So they want to get those segment quotes down as low as they can because, they're going to get more approvals. The other advantage to that, and it's not really answering that question, but just an example of what you can do by quoting repair cost instead of labor hours. We raised our rates $4 November 1st, and I haven't got a single call. We just don't really talk about what our labor rates are. It's not a secret. If somebody asks us, we'll tell them. But we've really shifted to repair cost instead of times and dollars per hour.
Very good. Here's another question, Matt. Do you separate internal work in process, that's set up PDI, from external customer versus warranty?
No, we don't.
Okay.
Sales is our best customer, so we want to make sure that they're right in the mix. Now, we do have pre-delivery departments where we have 2 departments that all they do is new setups, and then the rest of the shops do customer work. So I guess in one way we separate it, but as far as the Walkaround Sheet goes and working that into our schedule, we treat them like every other customer. Same price, same priorities, everything.
Okay. Next question, Matt. What are the key metrics to look at to support process accountability?
Well, the biggest one you're going to see is in your labor performance, or another term for that would be revenue recovery. You can see it in labor efficiency as well, but how many hours did we work versus how many hours did we get paid for? You're going to see that the most. And what we found from this process wasn't necessarily that we were reducing the time, but that we were reducing the time that they were wasting waiting on parts or waiting on approval, or things like that. The actual repair times have gotten a little bit better because they know the service manager is going to be asking them what's going on in about 4 hours at the longest. But by being able to see what's coming and know when we're stopped and have moved on to, say, priority number 2, we can go address those parts delays. We can make that other phone call to the customer again to get them approved, if that's what we're waiting on. So just being able to see why we're stopped has helped, because now the tech is not waiting for the service manager to tell him what to do next. He just moves to the next priority.
Okay, how do you measure how often the service managers are using the walkaround process?
Well, when you're done with the walkaround, you have to make adjustments in there. For example, if we're not on track, are we adding segments, or is the completion date going to change, move forward or move backwards? I can look in here because our system in IntelliDealer, I can see what's going on in all the stores. If there's something where the completion date is 2 days ago and we're still working on it, then obviously the service manager is not using this process and updating the system. Everything in here is live, so I can look anytime I want and see what's going on. The other thing is, I visit stores all the time, and if we have a walk-around sheet posted on the board from 2 days ago, then I'm guessing we haven't run it today. So it's really pretty simple to see if they're using it or not.
Okay. Here's one that I think all dealers can relate to. How do you handle the emergency jobs that come in during harvest and blows the schedule out of the water?
Well, we already talked about our use of the 00 priority. What we try to do going into harvest and going into planting and going into the mowing season in our lawn and garden shops is we really try to clear the deck of anything that has to get done that's not an emergency. We'll have a bank of work. Maybe it's reconditioning. Maybe it's some customer work that needs to be done, but it doesn't need to be done on any type of a schedule. We'll have that work there that's available in case there's not an emergency, but we try to clear the decks of everything going into a season so that we can respond as quickly as we can. Obviously, there's not a lot of prioritization going on the walk-around sheet during that time, but it does still keep a list of everything that the guy has assigned to him. And so we can still close work orders when they're finished. We can still have conversations with the technician about entering his notes so we can bill it, that type of thing. But unfortunately, with the seasonality of our business, we haven't been able to level that out completely over a 12-month period. So you just have to know that it's coming and plan for it by having enough time set aside where your guys can respond to those requests.
Okay, the next question. Matt, is this similar to the John Deere standard job pricing concept?
Well, the walk-around sheet isn't, but obviously talking about total repair cost per segment is right along those lines. We have job codes put in. We do use some John Deere service time codes as well. How this ties into that is you're having a conversation with your technician at the beginning of the job and then throughout the course of the job. So, not everything that comes out of John Deere as far as times go is accurate, especially if you're looking at warranty time. So, your technician, service manager, and customer have to all be on the same page at the start of it about how long this is going to take and how much it's going to cost. Using standard job pricing, can definitely make that conversation a lot shorter and maintain consistency between branches.
Okay, next question. Some dealers boast a 125% recovery rate. How is this possible?
Well, it's all in how you do the math, I guess. Uh, what we measure is how many hours a technician is available to work. So that, in other words, we start that number after you take out vacation, after you take out training, after you take out holidays. And then our labor performance metric is just that. How many of those hours did we sell?
Okay.
So if, there are jobs where you can beat them, and there's jobs that's going to take you longer. Our goal is to average 100%, which means we won as much as we lost. With 90 techs, we've got some rookies and we've got some veterans and we've got a lot of guys in the middle. And, sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to lose. I've had techs run, 110 and 115% for a while. And then, but over the course of the year, it's going to level out. So, like I said, it all comes down to how you do the math.
Okay. Next question, Matt. We are using PFW. Did you change anything in PFW, or are you just printing the open work orders for that day?
We are printing the Walkaround sheet, and if they're on PFW's IntelliDealer, if you go into that system, you'll see work order assignment and Walkaround sheet right down at the bottom of the screen. It'll say print Walkaround sheet, and that's all we're doing.
Yeah, it's not on this picture, folks, but it is just, as Matt says, it's just a link right on the bottom of this page, the work order assignment page.
Yep. Yeah, we haven't changed a thing.
Okay. Does Matt have written out processes, or is this a verbal process? If written, would he be willing to share his written process?
It is a written process. We actually have about 25 written processes. We don't specifically have one just for the Walkaround sheet, but we do have a work order to invoice process, and the Walkaround sheet is part of that process. If somebody wants to get in touch with me after the call, I'd be happy to talk them through it.
Okay. Next one. Matt, you do you use just Walkaround sheets, or do you have access to PFW on any other form like an iPad?
We're actually doing it both ways. I've got 3 service managers right now that have shifted to most of my guys have laptops. We've purchased 3 that you can convert into a tablet that kind of looks like an iPad, but it's Microsoft based. And they actually take that tablet out to do the walk around instead of printing off the sheet. The advantage there is you can make real-time, edits to that process, in your hand instead of having to write it on the paper and then going back to your office and making the adjustments. It has saved time, for the service managers that are using that.
Okay. How do you get a moving parts of the walk around to work together? Text with parts, people, etc. I would think everyone has to get along very well for this to work perfectly.
Well, if you're looking for perfection, you're probably in the wrong business. What we do is incorporate the parts guys into the process, and because we have multiple priorities on any technician screen, they can move to the next one like we've talked about already. Our parts guys actually deliver the parts to a rack in each technician's bay with the work order number on it. So that's how we're handling that. As we order parts, they come in. The parts guy that's assigned to take care of the service department, he's involved in the walk-around sheet every day. He knows what they're working on. He knows the ones that are an emergency, the ones that are really at the top of our list to get done. And so he walks them right out there to the guy. What we don't do is have multiple places where they get delivered. Each tech has a place where his parts go, and that's where they are, so he's not looking for them.
Okay, next question. Are you actually billing out each segment on the repair order separately? And if so, how do the customers respond to that?
No, we're not billing out each segment. In fact, if you look at the one on the screen there, You can see the Norman Tracy work order. There's 3 segments on there, the second, third, and fourth one on the list. You'll see number 1, which is a Canic Care service, is segment number 1. Segment number 3 is a repair knob, and segment number 4 is spindle bearings and a deck idler. Segment number 2 is already finished. So it's been closed, but it is not yet billed. The whole work order will be billed as one bill, but you can close individual segments as you get them finished. So I don't know, I don't have this up on my screen live, but you know, that work order may have been 6 or 7 segments, and we're just finishing up the last 2. So no, I can't imagine billing out by segment on individual bills. The customers would go nuts.
Okay, here's a pretty direct question. Do you charge the customer for doing the quote?
In most cases, no. In our lawn and garden shops, especially dealing with chainsaws and handheld stuff, we do charge a half-hour minimum on that stuff, but in most cases, we do not.
Okay.
I'd like to, though.
Okay, next question. If a flat rate is 4 hours and it takes you 2 hours to complete, what do you charge the customer?
4. We've quoted the job at whatever we quoted it. In this example, we would have quoted it at 4 hours plus parts. If that was an agreed upon repair, that's what we're going to bill. And you have to do that because we might do that job again next week and it take us 6 hours. And we're going to eat the 6, so we've got to be able to win the other 2. You know, like I said, our goal is to win as much as we lose. And if you can't take the wins, you certainly can't take the losses.
Okay. Do you have problems with mechanics logging onto the wrong segment? How easy or hard would that be to fix?
It's pretty simple. We don't have much trouble with it because even before we were doing the Walkaround sheet, all of our work was assigned via the computer. So the guys understand, you know, how to do that. That's part of our orientation for new technicians, and it's just kind of how we do things every day. If a technician does log on to the wrong segment, our service writer can move that before the work order is closed. So it's not that big a deal.
Okay. Do techs have daily visibility to the work order assignment screen and or report?
They don't have the Walkaround sheet itself, although it is posted in the service office. But everything that you see, you know, you're looking at a technician on this screen here, Clint Ratterman. Everything that you see on this screen, he has on his screen as well. It doesn't look exactly like this because this is actually the Walkaround sheet. But all of these work order assignments are on his computer screen, and that's how he goes about his day. The priorities are there. How much time he's been on it is there. Everything you see here is on there.
Okay. Do all of your service managers do the walk around, or do some of your shops use a shop foreman or service writer?
We have a lead tech in most of our shops, the ones that are large enough to have that. And in a lot of cases, the service manager will do the walk around in the morning, and then the lead tech will do the one after lunch. Now, in our lawn and garden shops, the completion time is a lot shorter, so they may get 3 jobs done from the 8 o'clock until lunch. In those cases, the service manager is doing both. But in our ag shops, where you're talking about long hour repairs, the service manager is doing the walk around in the morning and kind of getting the ball rolling. And then the lead tech will do it in the afternoon, and then he'll just come in and report anything worth noting to the service manager on the after lunch one.
Okay. How do you manage your on-the-road time and inventory?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but if you're talking about how many hours a tech has to sell on the road, it's exactly the same as it is in the shop.
Matt, is it possible he's asking if you do it as a segment?
Oh, okay. We charge our road time as a zone charge. That zone charge includes the tech time and wear and tear on the vehicle, and it's X amount of miles out from our dealership to the customer's place. that is a separate segment, and it gets billed out, at the end of the work order. And it's based on averages. It's if you're 5 miles away from the store, it's going to be this much, and then every 5 miles out, the zone charge goes up a little bit. So if you're 8 miles, you're going to get a little bit of a deal. If you're 11, you're going to pay for the 10. But at the end of the day, it's going to average itself out.
Okay, several people have asked similar questions to this next one, Matt, and that is, how are you basing your flat rate? Where are you getting your time schedules from?
Well, we've used some data from manufacturers, and then a lot of them we are actually creating them ourselves. We've created, I don't know how many thousand job codes in the last couple of years. As we complete jobs, if our service manager feels like this is a repair we're going to do again and we don't have an existing job code, they will shoot us a message at our headquarters and say, hey, look at this work order, segment number 3. This went like it's supposed to go. We didn't have any major problems. This is the parts we're going to use. And then if there's other models that are going to be very similar, we can expand that to different models. But we've made a commitment to really create our own. We also do take a look at how we perform against the job code. And one of the things that you can do in IntelliDealer is run history of job codes. So if we've got an 8-hour time, we can run history for the last 12 months. And if we're averaging 8.5 hours, with at least 10 incidents, then we need to raise that job time to 8.5. If we're averaging 7, we need to lower it. We don't want to overcharge or undercharge customers. So this system does give us the ability to go back and see how have we done against the standard. But I guess back to the question, you've got to make a commitment to create them.
And just to add to that,
go ahead.
Just to add to that, the PFW system tracks every time a job code was used. So it counts the number of times it was used and the average hours in each of those job codes.
Yep.
So you can compare against your profitability.
Also worth mentioning, if you want to use John Deere marketing service times or the job codes that Case has, you can import those into PFW from the manufacturer codes. So you don't have to sit there and type them all in.
Okay. How do your techs clock in and out of segments? Is there a central computer?
All of our techs have their own laptop, so they just log on to each individual segment at their workstation.
Okay. Do you break out tech drive time versus repair time? Can your field service techs beat a standard job time, allowing you to bill the customer for the gains?
Yes, to both questions. Segment 2, for example, would be that zone charge. So when they're driving, they're logged into that segment, so their time for driving goes to the right place. And once they get there, then obviously the clock starts ticking on that repair. Now I will say that we typically quote jobs in the shop, especially in season. If a customer calls you with a combine down in the middle of harvest, we're not talking a whole lot about quotes. We're sending a guy out there to get it fixed. Most of those jobs are billed time and materials in season. If we've decided in the off season to do a repair off site, and we do that a lot because when we get a machine at the shop, there's another machine you've got to work around the lot, find a place for it in the bay, and all those other delays that can happen. When we go out into the field on our schedule, not an emergency in season, we use the same job code time as we would in the shop.
Okay, next question. Do you allow your techs to see internal tickets like repair, vehicle repairs, lot and move equipment, etc.?
Yeah, we actually have monthly work orders for, say, shop maintenance or site maintenance, anything like that. We have one called Service Manager where they would log on to if the service manager wants them to get on the phone and talk to a customer about the repair. We'll be putting that on a monthly, and then those are closed at the end of the month. But our techs see everything that they log in. That's the only way they can log in. They see everything.
Okay. Yeah, I think you've already addressed this, but another listener asked, how do you keep work in process under control?
Well, as I said during the initial part, the walk-around sheet has helped tremendously with that, because as segments get completed, they get closed. And so, we don't have this big, huge glut of work orders to close the last 5 days of the month. As they get finished, they get closed. And when the last segment on the work order gets closed, we can bill it. So this has kept us in a daily focus of getting things closed. And that's what's driven our WIP down to about half of what it used to be. This system, there's more to it than just talking to the tech. The service manager and tech conversation is a big benefit, but then the feedback you get from the techs and what's been finished, and maybe the tech is done with the job, but he hasn't completed his notes. So you can say, hey, don't pick up another wrench until you get those notes done, so we can bill this out. We actually report work in process to our guys on a daily basis. It's on their home screen of IntelliDealer. And, when things start getting a little bit out of whack, they're getting a phone call from me, and the walk-around process, they usually know exactly what's going on every time I call them if something's going a little bit long. But really, this process is a daily focus on closing segments. That's the gist of the whole thing.
Okay. Does the Dealer Association's flat rate guide offer any help because it covers all lines?
Some in the absence of a manufacturer job code, that's a great place to start. As with any job code that is out there, produced by somebody outside of your own system, you got to take a look at it and see if it makes sense. We have a conversation with our tech at the beginning of every work order about, hey, this is what the job code says. You see any problem with that? Most of the time the answer is no, but if something doesn't look right, a lot of times we find that it's a misunderstanding of the scope of work. So, the job says do this, and they're thinking I got to do this plus this plus this. So having that conversation at the front end really is a good check and balance for any job code system. But definitely anything that's published can help supplement what you already have. It's a good place to start.
Okay. Is a closed segment still work in process?
Yes.
Okay. This is going to be the last question. And then, by the way, we've got several dozen other questions that, as I said earlier, we'll send them on to Matt and Ted, and we'll get some answers for you. But the final question: does the service manager work order that they use during a call go against their incentive?
Can you say that again?
Does the service manager's work order that they use during a call count against their incentive? I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure what a work order used during a call means, but the way our system worked is you worked X amount of hours and we build out this many hours. So there's lots of factors that go into that. But if you worked 8 and we build 9, then you're winning. If you worked 8 and we build 7, you're losing. And we look at it every 6 months and adjust from there.
Okay. As I said, that's the last question. We're out of time, but if you would like to go back and review this webinar, today's presentation in audio will be made available on the Farm Equipment website. Watch your email and the Farm Equipment eWatch newsletter for more information. On behalf of Matt, Ted, the entire team at PFW, and the Farm Equipment staff, thank you for joining us today. When you leave the webinar, a short survey about your experience with the webinar will pop up. Please let us know what you think of this live event and what future topics you would like to see covered in future webinars. From all of us at Farm Equipment Magazine and the Ag Division of Lessiter Publications, Thanks for tuning in, and best wishes for a special Christmas holiday and a prosperous new year.